Well, we're headed down to the, oh, just crushed the white car. What would it look like to build a portable chainsaw sawmill that had everything you needed and fit on a fork truck or a hand cart or a dolly? Whatever you want to call it. The answer is it would look something like this right here. Now this portable chainsaw sawmill fits on something the size of a hand truck. It will cut logs up to 11 feet long and anywhere between 25 and 30 inches diameter depending on your chainsaw bar, and is very portable. Now the reason we're doing this is Helene. We got hit pretty hard. We lost 21 trees on our little 2.5 acres. So we've got plenty of lumber to cut up. And some woods like pine and poplar, they're just not worth taking to the sawmill to have them cut them up and then dry them and all the stuff. It's nice to have a solution right here at home, something small, portable, and I can tuck in a corner when I'm done. Remember that this is just a prototype. This is the first one I've built of this kind. I have a lot of high hopes for it, but I'm sure we're going to run into some problems. Now there's some things I would already change about it, but we'll talk about that later on in the video. For right now, let's get this thing unpacked and see how it runs. Let's talk a little bit about the saw carriage. This is the whole section that carries the saw down the log. And I think really the most interesting thing going on here is this. This is a geared handle, so I can turn this right here, and there's a 4-to-1 gear ratio, so I don't have to use a lot of energy to turn it. It turns really easily. And then when I'm pulling back on this, if I'm pulling back on the carriage, I don't want this gear or handle to be engaged with this primary, because if I'm trying to pull on that, that's a lot of potential energy. But what I have here is this little lever with kind of a cammed or eccentric center. So when I pull there's a pin on this side, I'll show you that in a second. When I pull this pin, I can pull the lever out of the way. That disengages this handle gear, and then it makes it much easier to pull the saw carriage back. Now to re-engage it is simply just an opposite direction, making sure the gears are lined up, pop that little pin, and that pin locks everything in place, and then I'm back to business. Remote throttle control, I got this little handle off Amazon or online, I don't even remember where. All I have to do is pull this lever and it pulls the trigger on the chainsaw. So the second part of this remote throttle control is this part that I have hose clamped down to the saw itself. Now this is just some 3D printed parts, and this little lever right here comes back when I pull the lever up on the handle. And now, and before I've had them where they just kind of sit out here and push in, and it's kind of an awkward action. This makes it a really nice smooth action, and I can also very easily control the speed of the saw with the way that is set up, and I've really enjoyed this little setup right here. I do need to come up with a better way of taking this on and off instead of using hose clamp. So to attach the saw to the saw tower, I've just got some plywood coming out here, a double stack of plywood, and a 5/16 tapped hole here, and I've dropped a 5/16 bolt in it with a nut on the other side. I'm just using a single hole, but on the back end of the chainsaw, I have a hole through and a screw attaching it to the board in the back. And that's actually a pretty secure way of holding that. Now this all thread goes down into this section, and below this piece of plywood, I have a nut that matches the threading embedded in there, and it's kind of captured. So all I have to do is just use a drill, and I can raise and lower it pretty easily. Now if I was out in the woods and I didn't have a drill with me, it wouldn't be that hard to make a handle for this, to do it by hand. But you know, when you're at home and you have a drill, use a dang drill. Now this has been working pretty good. Now the higher I bring the saw up the saw tower, it gets unstable. You can see some movement in there. Now it will cut, but the saw jumps a little bit, and I don't like that. It makes for a poorer quality cut, even though we are using a ripping blade. Typically gives you a pretty good quality cut for a chainsaw mill on wood. But the lower we are, it seems to be going pretty good. Now there's some things that we can do to fix that. The pieces that the logs sit on are only attached in a small, like 2-inch area, and we're using clamps and T-track, and that's not really ideal because it's not a really secure hold. So I've added some angle pieces. That's helped a lot. A couple other things that we could think about doing is making these pieces run underneath the carriage. That would help sturdy it up some too. So it's definitely not a perfect saw, but it's working for what we need it for really well. Now I will mention, this is a farm boss. When they're great chainsaws, but it's a 50cc saw. And anytime you start getting up into the realm of like 12, 18, 20 inches of wood that you're cutting, you really want to be into a 70cc saw. So maybe like a 363 or even higher, like a 661 would be amazing for slabbing. This is a very small saw, and I'm really proud of the job that it's doing right now. So you'll notice, like from our other sawmill videos, we're going considerably slower, and that's just because we have a much smaller saw on here. And I will put some links in the description box to my other sawmill videos. Now my very first one was a really portable, super easy to build out of 2x4s, and honestly to date that's still kind of like my favorite sawmill. Even though I love how portable and compact this is, it does need some improvements. But I think we still need to go ahead and cut some more logs with it. Woohoo! Now, I don't want to go too deep into the actual build of this project, but I will touch on the highlights. One of the things that's really cool about this is we were able to build the whole project out of 1.5 sheets of plywood. Now, where we get plywood from, it's about $40 a sheet for cabinet grade, and that makes this build about $60 in material as far as the plywood goes to build it. We had about another $30, $35 in hardware to put the whole thing together. Now the trunk of it, or the part the saw carriage rides down, we just screwed together a couple of dados and a top, bottom, front, and back, and with kind of an H shape, so pretty similar to like a steel beam. Now the saw carriage, the part that the chainsaw rides down the carriage, we cut out on the Phantom CNC and put together off camera. I was kind of in a hurry to get this done and get it out and get it tested. The last part of this was the hand truck, or all the things that the whole sawmill sits on. And I wish I would have spent a little bit more time on this design, but I am happy with the way it's working in the testing model. So I want to change it a little bit, make it a little beefier, and I'll talk about that in future videos. But same scenario, we cut it out, everything glued together, screwed together, and then brought it out to test it. I'm really liking the portable aspect to this, and the fact that I can pick up the sawmill and move it to the log and not the log to the sawmill, because quite frankly, logs are ridiculously heavy. And at the beginning, I think you saw where I put the log blades, or the parts that the log's sitting on right now, on either side of a log, and then we fastened it to it so we could cut that down to a smaller weight, and then we push these together and pull the log up and set it on it. So it requires us having to move a lot less weight. And quite frankly, Maggie and I are getting older and we don't want to move a lot of weight. So that worked out really nicely. The stability issue is something I'm pretty sure I can work through without too much hassle. So just at the top here, I've got a little more movement than I would like. And when you have the saw putting pressure on the log, that means it's jumping back and forth and tilting just a little bit. And you can see that in the quality of the cut, where there's like these little ribs. Again, that could be planed out. 2 or 3 passes in the planer and that's gone. So it's not a huge deal, but it's something I want to fix. I want it to be more solid. Big shout out to Still and their Farm Boss chainsaw. This saw is not designed to do this kind of work, but it was a champ. It went through all this with no problem whatsoever. And also to Grabo, their new high flows, which you saw in a little segment when we were moving lumber, they're phenomenal. They suck down to pretty much anything. It made moving the slabs or the cutoffs really easy for us. So very much appreciate those guys. And again, I appreciate you guys. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.